Throw her out. The billionaire's fiancé pointed at the trembling maid as two security guards grabbed her by both arms. "No, please, I didn't steal anything," Emily cried, her voice breaking under the weight of fear. Her words didn't matter. The suitcase had already been opened. Millions of dollars worth of diamonds spilled across the polished marble floor, scattering in every direction like tiny stars. A deafening silence swallowed the grand hall. Then came the gasps. Servants covered their mouths. Executives exchanged stunned looks. Reporters standing outside the open entrance immediately raised their cameras. Within seconds, dozens of phones were recording. Then came the words that destroyed her life. "She's nothing but a poor thief." The billionaire's fiancé stepped forward and slapped Emily so hard that she crashed onto the marble floor. The impact echoed through the mansion. Nobody moved. Nobody defended her. Not even the billionaire's son. The man whose eyes had never stopped searching for her every time he came home. He stood there, watching the woman he had silently fallen in love with being dragged across the floor. Watching security pull her toward the gates. Watching the mansion doors close behind her. Emily looked back one last time. The tears in her eyes carried only one question. Why didn't you save me? She believed he had chosen his family's billions over her. She couldn't have been more wrong. Because before this nightmare came to an end, that same billionaire heir would walk away from an empire worth billions, turn against his own father, destroy the woman everyone trusted, and sacrifice everything he had ever known. For the poor maid, everyone believed was a criminal. But what kind of secret could make the future owner of one of America's richest business empires throw away his inheritance for an ordinary maid? And what was the billionaire's fiancé so desperate to hide that she was willing to ruin innocent lives to protect it? The truth had started weeks earlier. The Harrison estate stretched across nearly 100 acres on the outskirts of Boston, hidden behind towering iron gates and guarded by private security 24 hours a day. People didn't simply call it a mansion. They called it a kingdom. Inside those gates lived one of the wealthiest families in America. The Harrisons weren't merely rich. They were the kind of family whose business decisions could shake stock markets before breakfast. Harrison Global Holdings owned luxury hotels, shipping companies, hospitals, technology firms, commercial real estate, and one of the country's largest charitable foundations. Every magazine that ranked America's wealthiest families carried Richard Harrison's name near the very top. To the public, Richard Harrison was the billionaire who built an empire from nothing. To his employees, he was demanding but fair. To the media, he was a respected philanthropist. Very few people knew that after his beloved wife, Eleanor Harrison, died from cancer 15 years earlier, Richard slowly became emotionally dependent on the one woman who always seemed to know exactly what to say. Victoria Blake. She had entered his life as a charity consultant. Beautiful, elegant, soft-spoken, patient, or at least, that was the version she carefully showed the world. Hidden beneath the designer dresses and polished smiles was a woman whose hunger for power had no limits. Long before she became Richard Harrison's fiancée, Victoria had learned that people trusted beauty far more quickly than honesty. As a teenager growing up in foster care, she watched wealthy donors pose for photographs while children returned to empty rooms the moment the cameras disappeared. She didn't grow up dreaming about love. She grew up believing only one thing. Money was power. Power meant survival. And once she finally tasted luxury, she swore she would never become poor again. That promise slowly turned into obsession. An obsession that would eventually destroy lives. Standing beside Richard during charity galas, Victoria smiled for every camera, accepted praise for humanitarian work she barely cared about, and spoke passionately about helping struggling families. Behind closed doors, she measured people by one thing: whether they were useful. If they weren't, she discarded them without remorse. That ruthless instinct had quietly earned her another powerful ally. Daniel Ross, the company's chief financial officer. Publicly, Daniel was known as a financial genius who had helped Harrison Global multiply its profits for over 20 years. Inside boardrooms, investors admired him. Employees respected him. Richard trusted him completely. But years earlier, Daniel had made one decision that chained his future to Victoria's forever. One illegal transaction became another. One hidden account became dozens. One forged signature became an entire web of financial fraud buried beneath fake charities, shell companies, and non-existent disaster relief projects. Millions quietly disappeared every year. Then tens of millions. Every successful cover-up made them bolder. Neither of them noticed that the cracks in their perfect plan had already begun forming years before. Far away from the luxury wing of the mansion, another young woman quietly pushed a cleaning cart through the servants' hallway. Emily Carter, 24 years old. A maid. A woman nobody important noticed. Or so they believed. She wasn't born into wealth. She wasn't connected to powerful families. She owned no expensive jewelry. No designer clothes. No luxury car. Everything she possessed could fit inside one small suitcase. Yet there was something about Emily that quietly earned the respect of nearly every employee who worked beside her. She never raised her voice. Never gossiped. Never stole. Never complained. Even when life gave her every reason to. As she carefully folded fresh towels inside one of the guest suites, another maid smiled. "Emily, you're doing Grace's work again." Emily laughed softly. "She has enough to worry about. You know she'll never even know." Emily shrugged. Doing the right thing isn't supposed to earn applause. The older maid smiled. "You really are different." Emily simply continued folding the towels. She didn't know those simple words would one day stay in someone's memory when the entire world accused her of being a thief. Her kindness wasn't an accident. Years earlier, life had stripped almost everything from her. At 14, she lost both parents in what police called a tragic brake failure. Her father, Michael Carter, had been an accountant. Her mother, Sarah, taught music at a local elementary school. They never came home. Emily still remembered standing beside two closed coffins, clutching her grandmother's shaking hand, while people whispered how unfair life could be. The official investigation ended within days. Mechanical failure. Case closed. Her grandmother accepted the verdict because she had no strength left to fight. Emily accepted it because she was too young to understand. But deep inside, one memory never stopped haunting her. The night before his death, Michael Carter had come home unusually quiet. He locked himself inside his small home office. He burned several pages in the fireplace. Then he placed a thick brown envelope inside a locked drawer. When Emily innocently asked what was wrong, he forced a smile, knelt beside her, and gently brushed her hair behind her ear. "If anything ever happens to me, always remember something, sweetheart." "What is it, Dad?" "No amount of money is worth losing your soul." At 14, she thought he was simply giving fatherly advice. Years later, Those words would become the key to everything. Unknown to Emily. Unknown even to Richard Harrison. Michael Carter hadn't merely been an accountant. He had uncovered financial records connected to Harrison Global's charitable foundation shortly before his death. And somewhere, hidden beyond anyone's imagination, the truth about that discovery had survived, just waiting for the right person to find it. As Emily finished arranging the room, she paused before an old framed photograph hanging on the wall. It showed Richard Harrison standing beside his late wife, Eleanor, and a teenage boy with calm blue eyes. Ethan Harrison, the billionaire heir, the future owner of everything. Emily smiled politely at the photograph before returning to work. She had never actually spoken to him. She only knew him from newspaper headlines. Unlike his father, Ethan rarely appeared in public. He preferred boardrooms over parties, factories over red carpets. Employees often whispered that if Ethan ever became CEO, Harrison Global would become even more respected than it already was. What nobody inside the mansion realized was that Ethan Harrison's return home was only days away. And the moment their lives crossed, nothing inside Harrison Manor would ever be the same. The private jet descended through a blanket of white clouds before touching down smoothly on the runway at Logan International Airport. Waiting beside the aircraft was a convoy of black luxury SUVs. The lead driver hurried forward as the cabin door opened. A tall man in a charcoal gray suit stepped onto the stairs. Ethan Harrison. At 31 years old, he was already considered one of the brightest business minds in America. Financial magazines often described him as the billionaire who preferred blueprints to champagne. Unlike many heirs born into unimaginable wealth, Ethan had never been interested in showing off. He wore expensive watches, but rarely looked at them. He owned sports cars, yet often drove ordinary company SUVs during factory inspections. He could have spent every night at celebrity galas, but preferred walking through warehouses, speaking directly with workers. That reputation hadn't appeared overnight. Years earlier, after graduating from business school, Richard Harrison had deliberately refused to give his son an executive office. "If you're going to inherit this empire," Richard had told him, "you'll first understand the people who built it." Ethan had started at the bottom, loading trucks, inspecting hotel kitchens, working overnight shifts inside shipping terminals, reviewing customer complaints himself. Those years quietly transformed him into something unusual. A billionaire who understood ordinary people. The bodyguard opened the SUV door. "Welcome home, Mr. Harrison." Ethan gave a small nod. "How's my father?" "Busy preparing tomorrow night's charity gala, sir." "And Miss Blake?" The driver's polite smile faded slightly. "She's supervising everything." Ethan leaned back against the leather seat. Outside the window, Boston's skyline drifted past. His eyes remained fixed on the city. He had been away for nearly 6 weeks negotiating Harrison Global's acquisition of a renewable energy company in Colorado. The deal would create thousands of new jobs. Investors celebrated it. His father praised him publicly. Yet Ethan felt strangely empty. Success had become routine. Peace had not. Back at Harrison Manor, preparations for the annual Harrison Foundation Charity Gala had transformed the mansion into organized chaos. Florists carried giant arrangements through marble hallways. Electricians adjusted crystal chandeliers. Chefs prepared meals worth thousands of dollars. Luxury brands delivered custom decorations. Television networks had already announced live coverage of the event. To the public, It would be another glamorous evening celebrating generosity. Hidden beneath the polished image, millions of dollars had already disappeared from the foundation's accounts. Victoria Blake stood inside the ballroom wearing an elegant emerald green designer dress, while directing workers like a queen inspecting her kingdom. "No." She pointed toward the stage. "The flowers should face the audience." Another employee rushed to obey. "You." She turned toward a waiter. "Those champagne glasses aren't symmetrical." "I'm sorry, Miss Blake." "Sorry doesn't fix incompetence." The waiter lowered his head. Across the room, Grace Mitchell watched quietly. Years of experience had taught her something. Victoria never corrected mistakes. She enjoyed humiliating people. Grace had seen it happen too many times. And lately, Emily seemed to be Victoria's favorite target. Emily carefully carried a wooden box wrapped inside a soft cloth toward the family library. Grace had instructed her to dust every antique in the room before Ethan arrived. The library was unlike anything Emily had ever imagined. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves stretched toward a painted ceiling. Rare first editions filled glass cabinets. Historic maps covered the walls. In the center of the room sat a grand piano that no one had touched in years. Everything reflected Billionaire Harrison's love of history and music. Emily smiled sadly. She had heard the staff talk about Billionaire countless times. Unlike many wealthy women, Billionaire had reportedly memorized every employee's name. She attended birthdays, paid college tuition for workers' children, visited sick staff members in hospitals. When she died 15 years earlier, several longtime employees admitted the mansion had never felt the same again. Emily gently dusted an old photograph resting beside the fireplace. Richard, Billionaire, young Ethan, all smiling. For a brief moment, the mansion felt less like a palace and more like a home that had once known happiness. As she reached for another antique, she accidentally brushed against a small wooden music box sitting on the shelf. It slipped from her hands. Emily gasped. The music box struck the carpet instead of the hardwood floor. Its lid popped open. The tiny melody mechanism no longer played. Oh no! She carefully picked it up. One small brass gear had come loose. Grace's footsteps echoed outside. "Emily, I'm in here." Grace entered and immediately noticed the music box. Her face turned pale. "Oh no." "I'm so sorry," Emily whispered. "It fell." Grace hurried over. "Do you know whose that is?" Emily shook her head. "It belonged to Mrs. Billionaire Harrison." Emily's stomach tightened. "I'll pay for it." Grace sighed. "You couldn't afford it in 10 lifetimes." Emily stared silently at the broken mechanism. Then, she gently turned the box over, studied the gears, examined the tiny spring. Grace frowned. "What are you doing?" "My father." Emily smiled faintly. "He repaired antique clocks as a hobby." A brief flash of memory crossed her mind. She was 10 years old again, sitting beside her father in their tiny garage, watching him carefully polish tiny brass gears beneath a work lamp. "Machines talk," Michael Carter had once told her. "You just have to learn their language." Back in the present, Emily carefully adjusted the spring, aligned the tiny gear, closed the lid, turned the key. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a soft melody filled the library. Grace froze. "You." Emily looked almost embarrassed. "I guess I remembered." Neither woman noticed someone standing quietly outside the partially opened library door. Ethan Harrison. He had entered through the side hallway moments earlier after arriving home. The music had stopped him in his tracks. That melody. He hadn't heard it since his mother's funeral. Without making a sound, he watched the young maid smiling softly as the music box played. Not proudly, not expecting praise, simply relieved that something precious had been saved. Something about that moment stirred a memory deep inside him. As a boy, he had often fallen asleep listening to that exact melody while Eleanor tucked him into bed. His mother had always said, "Objects aren't valuable because they're expensive. They're valuable because they carry love." Ethan swallowed quietly. For the first time in years, he felt as though a small piece of his mother had returned. He stepped into the library. Grace immediately straightened. "Mr. Harrison." Emily turned so quickly that the music box nearly slipped from her hands again. "Oh, I'm sorry, sir." Ethan looked at the box, then at Emily. "You fixed it." Emily nodded nervously. "I hope you don't mind. It accidentally stopped working." Instead of anger, a small smile appeared on Ethan's face. "You didn't just fix it." His voice became softer. "You brought it back." Emily lowered her eyes. "I was just lucky." "No." Ethan looked at the tiny music box. "My mother used to say only patient hands could repair delicate things." Their eyes met for only a second. Neither spoke. Neither understood why that brief moment felt strangely important. From the upstairs balcony, another pair of eyes had witnessed everything. Victoria Blake. Her smile disappeared. She had never seen Ethan look at another woman that way. Not with desire. Not yet. But with something even more dangerous. Respect. Her fingers slowly tightened around the balcony railing. A tiny seed of jealousy took root inside her heart. And jealousy, once planted, never stopped growing. The next morning, Harrison Manor woke before sunrise. Long before the billionaire family stepped out of their bedrooms, the servants' wing was already alive with movement. The aroma of freshly baked bread drifted from the kitchens, while gardeners trimmed hedges that looked more like works of art than plants. Chauffeurs polished luxury cars until they reflected the morning sky. Every employee knew one thing. The annual Harrison Foundation Charity Gala was only 2 days away. Presidents, senators, Fortune 500 executives, celebrities, and international investors would all be attending. Television networks had already announced live coverage. To the world, the gala represented generosity. To Victoria Blake, it was the perfect stage. Standing before the enormous mirror inside her luxury suite, Victoria fastened a diamond necklace worth nearly $3 million around her neck. A makeup artist smiled. "You'll be the most photographed woman at the gala." Victoria barely looked at her. "I always am." The makeup artist laughed nervously, unsure whether it had been a joke. It wasn't. Victoria had spent years carefully building the image of the perfect future Mrs. Harrison. Every magazine praised her elegance. Every charity event portrayed her as a compassionate woman devoted to helping struggling families. She loved every headline, every compliment, every camera. But compliments were no longer enough. She wanted control. Complete control. Once she married Richard Harrison, the Harrison Foundation would become hers to command. Billions of dollars passed through its charitable programs every year. To the public, those funds built schools, hospitals, and disaster relief centers. Behind carefully hidden financial records, millions quietly vanished before reaching the people who desperately needed them. That secret rested between only 2 people. Victoria and Daniel Ross. Neither realized fate had already placed someone inside the mansion, whose past was quietly connected to theirs. Emily finished arranging breakfast in the family dining room before carrying fresh flowers into the upstairs hallway. As she passed Eleanor Harrison's portrait, she paused for only a moment. The restored music box still echoed in her memory. She smiled softly. I hope he liked hearing it again. She never imagined Ethan had spent nearly an hour in the library after she left, listening to that melody over and over. For the first time in years, the room had felt alive. Not because of the music, because of the person who had restored it without asking for recognition. That morning, Ethan stood inside his home office, overlooking the estate. His assistant placed several folders onto the desk. These are tomorrow's gala schedules. Ethan nodded. What about the employee appreciation bonuses? They've all been approved. Good. His assistant hesitated. Sir, there's one more thing. What is it? The maintenance department says someone repaired your mother's music box. A faint smile appeared before Ethan could hide it. I know. It surprised everyone. It surprised me too. His assistant gathered the remaining papers. Would you like us to reward whoever repaired it? Ethan looked toward the window. No. The assistant looked confused. I'd rather thank her personally. Emily pushed her cleaning cart toward the west wing, unaware that Ethan had quietly memorized her name after asking Grace the previous evening. Not because she was beautiful. Not because she had done anything extraordinary. Because genuine kindness had become surprisingly rare in his world. As she entered the upstairs sitting room, Ethan happened to step into the hallway. Emily nearly bumped into him. Oh. She quickly lowered her head. I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison. He smiled gently. You seem to apologize a lot. Emily looked embarrassed. I work around expensive things. I noticed. For a brief second, neither moved. The hallway felt strangely quiet. Ethan broke the silence first. I wanted to thank you. For what? My mother's music box. Emily smiled shyly. It wasn't difficult. I had experts examine it years ago. They couldn't fix it. Emily shrugged. My father always said old things only need patience. The mention of her father lingered in Ethan's mind. What did he do? He was an accountant. She paused. But repairing old clocks made him happiest. Another tiny flashback flickered across her thoughts. She was 11 years old, sitting beside Michael Carter while he repaired a grandfather clock inside a neighbor's house. Never force broken pieces together, he had told her. If you rush, you'll destroy what's left. She hadn't understood then. One day, those words would apply to people far more than machines. Back in the hallway, Ethan smiled. He sounds like a wise man. He was. The past tense escaped before Emily realized it. Ethan noticed the sadness in her eyes. I'm sorry. She nodded politely. It's been a long time. Before he could say another word. There you are. Victoria's voice sliced through the silence. She approached with a bright smile that never reached her eyes. There you are, darling. She kissed Ethan lightly on the cheek. Then her gaze shifted toward Emily. The warmth disappeared instantly. What are you doing standing here? Emily immediately stepped back. I was cleaning. Victoria glanced at the untouched feather duster. It doesn't look like cleaning. Ethan answered calmly. I stopped her. Victoria laughed. Oh. Then she looked directly at Emily. Then you're dismissed. Emily nodded. Yes, Miss Blake. As she hurried away, Victoria watched until she disappeared around the corner. Only then did she look back at Ethan. "You seem interested in the staff lately." "I was thanking her for repairing Mother's music box." Victoria folded her arms. "A maid fixed something professional restorers couldn't." "It happened." Victoria forced another smile. "Interesting." Inside, a different conversation echoed. He's defending her. She had seen Ethan interact with hundreds of employees. He was always polite, always respectful, but never curious, never interested, never smiling. This was different, very different, and Victoria hated differences she couldn't control. Later that afternoon, Daniel Ross entered Victoria's private office carrying a leather briefcase. He locked the door behind him. The Cayman transfer cleared. Victoria didn't even look up from the financial reports spread across her desk. "How much?" $8.4 million. She nodded. "Any questions from the auditors?" Daniel smirked. "None." He handed her another folder. "Tomorrow we'll move another $12 million through the disaster relief accounts." Victoria finally smiled. "Perfect." Daniel lowered his voice. "The new internal audit begins next month. They won't find anything. They could if someone starts asking questions." Victoria looked toward the closed office door. "Richard never questions me." "I'm not talking about Richard." She looked up. "Ethan." Daniel nodded. "He reviews details." Victoria dismissed the concern with a wave. "I know exactly how to handle Ethan." Outside the office, Emily approached carrying freshly pressed documents Grace had asked her to deliver. As she reached for the doorknob, she heard muffled voices. "An audit. A transfer. $12 million. She frowned. The words meant nothing to her. Assuming it was a private meeting, she quietly turned away without knocking. Neither Victoria nor Daniel realized someone had paused outside the door. Emily didn't understand what she had heard, but the audience did. Another tiny thread had been woven into a much larger conspiracy. That evening, as the sun dipped below the estate, Ethan stood alone on the balcony outside his bedroom. Below, he saw Emily helping an elderly groundskeeper carry heavy flower pots after the man's back gave out. No one had asked her to help. No cameras were watching. No supervisor stood nearby. She simply saw someone struggling and stepped in. The old groundskeeper smiled gratefully. "You've got your father's heart, young lady." Emily looked surprised. "You knew my father." The old man blinked. "I..." Before he could answer, another worker called his name from across the garden. He hesitated. "I'll tell you another time." He walked away. Emily watched him leave, puzzled. From the balcony above, Ethan had witnessed everything. He didn't know why, but for the first time in years, he found himself wanting to know the story of a woman everyone else seemed to overlook. Behind another upstairs window, Victoria watched the same scene. Her nails dug into the wooden windowsill. Jealousy had already become suspicion. Suspicion was slowly becoming fear. And fear would soon drive her to commit the greatest mistake of her life. The following morning, Harrison Manor buzzed with even greater urgency. Only one day remained before the Harrison Foundation Charity Gala. Luxury cars arrived every few minutes carrying event planners, celebrity chefs, decorators, and media coordinators. Every hallway sparkled. Every chandelier had been polished twice. Every employee moved with quiet precision, knowing that one mistake during the gala could cost them their job. Victoria Blake loved every second of it. Standing in the center of the grand ballroom, she slowly turned in a circle, inspecting every table. "No," she said coldly, pointing toward a centerpiece. "Move those roses 2 inches to the left." A florist quickly obeyed. She walked a few more steps. "The candles are uneven." Another employee rushed forward. Victoria smiled to herself. Control wasn't simply something she enjoyed. It was something she needed. Every person obeying her reminded her how far she had climbed from the frightened teenager who once counted pennies for dinner. But beneath that polished confidence lurked a growing anxiety she refused to acknowledge. Her mind kept replaying one image. Ethan, smiling at Emily. It wasn't romance. Not yet. But respect was even more dangerous. Respect became trust. Trust became loyalty. And loyalty could destroy everything Victoria had spent years building. She couldn't allow that to happen. Not to a maid. Not to anyone. Emily entered the ballroom carrying a tray of crystal glasses. Grace walked beside her. "After these are set, help the kitchen prepare the dessert tables." Emily nodded. "No problem." Grace looked around before lowering her voice. "One piece of advice." Emily smiled. "I'm listening. Stay out of Miss Blake's sight today." Emily let out a quiet laugh. "I've been trying." Grace didn't laugh. "I'm serious." Emily noticed the concern on the older woman's face. Before she could ask another question, "Emily." Victoria's voice echoed across the ballroom. Every employee immediately looked up. Emily walked over. "Yes, Miss Blake." Victoria picked up one crystal wine glass and held it toward the light. "What do you see?" Emily looked carefully. "I'm not sure." "Exactly." Victoria suddenly rubbed her finger across the rim. A tiny fingerprint appeared. She held it high enough for nearby employees to see. "You call this clean?" Emily blinked. "I polished every glass myself." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "So now you're arguing." "I'm just saying I cleaned them." Victoria smiled. A smile that made Grace's stomach tighten. Then, without warning, Victoria deliberately knocked the entire tray from Emily's hands. Dozens of crystal glasses crashed onto the marble floor. The sound echoed through the ballroom. Employees froze. Emily instinctively stepped back. I'm sorry." Victoria folded her arms. "Sorry." She looked around the room. "Do you all see this?" Nobody answered. This is exactly what happens when people without standards are hired. Emily opened her mouth. "I didn't." "You didn't what?" Victoria interrupted. "You didn't drop them." Emily looked at the shattered pieces. She knew what had happened. Everyone nearby knew what had happened. But nobody dared say it. Grace finally stepped forward. "Miss Blake." Victoria turned slowly. "Yes. I was standing here." "And the tray." Grace hesitated. She looked at Richard Harrison's fiancée, then at the frightened employees surrounding them. One wrong sentence, and decades of loyal service could disappear. Grace lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry." Victoria smirked. "I thought so." She turned back to Emily. "The cost will come out of your wages." Emily quietly nodded. "Yes, Miss Blake." As she knelt to collect the broken glass, one sharp piece sliced across her palm. Blood slowly trickled onto the white marble floor. She quickly hid her injured hand behind her apron. No one noticed. Except Ethan. He had entered the ballroom moments earlier with his father. Richard Harrison was discussing investment opportunities with several board members when Ethan's attention drifted toward the cleaning staff. He saw Emily kneeling alone. He saw the blood. He also noticed something else. Not a single shard of glass lay where Emily had originally been standing. The pattern of the broken pieces spread outward from Victoria's position. It was a tiny detail, one almost nobody would ever notice. But Ethan had spent years reconstructing industrial accidents inside company factories. He had learned something important. Broken objects always told the truth. People didn't. He quietly excused himself. "I'll be right back." Richard barely looked up. Ethan walked toward Emily. She immediately tried hiding her injured hand. "You've been hurt." "It's just a scratch." He gently reached for her wrist. "You should let someone disinfect it." "I'll be okay." Victoria appeared beside them almost instantly. "Darling." Her smile looked perfect. "She's fine." Ethan didn't let go. "She's bleeding." Victoria laughed lightly. "She's a maid. Accidents happen." Ethan calmly looked at her. "This accident didn't." For one brief second, Victoria's smile disappeared. Only for a heartbeat. Then it returned. "I think you're overthinking a few broken glasses." Without another word, Ethan removed a clean handkerchief from his jacket pocket. He wrapped it around Emily's bleeding hand himself. Every employee in the ballroom watched in stunned silence. Nobody, absolutely nobody, had ever seen a Harrison family member personally care for a servant. Emily looked overwhelmed. "You don't have to do this." "I know." His answer was quiet. "But I want to." Victoria felt something burning inside her chest. Jealousy. Pure. Uncontrollable. Jealousy. That afternoon, Emily walked toward the servants' quarters after finishing her shift. She carefully removed the blood-stained handkerchief. She intended to wash it before returning it. As she unfolded it, something slipped onto the floor. A small silver cufflink. She immediately picked it up. It carried the Harrison family crest. "Oh no." She looked around. Nobody had seen it. "I need to return this." She carefully placed both the cufflink and handkerchief inside her apron pocket. Neither she nor the audience realized. That simple decision would later become one of the reasons Ethan refused to believe she was a thief. A dishonest person would have quietly sold the priceless cufflink. Emily never even considered it. Meanwhile, inside Victoria's private office, Daniel Ross closed the curtains before speaking. "You've got another problem." Victoria poured herself a glass of sparkling water. "Ethan." He requested access to next month's charity audit. Her hand froze. "What?" "He says he wants to understand how the foundation allocates disaster relief funding." Victoria slowly lowered the glass. "He never cared before." "He does now." Daniel stepped closer. "And if he starts reviewing old records?" Silence filled the office. Victoria's mind raced. Then, her expression changed. Cold. Calculated. Dangerously calm. "Then we make sure his attention goes somewhere else." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Victoria looked out the window. Down below, Emily was helping another employee carry heavy supplies. Victoria's lips curled into a faint smile. "If Ethan wants to keep noticing the maid." She paused. "Then the maid will become the perfect distraction." Daniel immediately understood. His face grew serious. "Victoria, be careful." She looked back at him. "I always am." Elsewhere on the estate, old groundskeeper Samuel quietly watched Emily return Ethan's silver cufflink to the mansion's security office without keeping it. He smiled sadly. "So much like your father." His voice barely rose above a whisper. Then his smile faded. 20 years of silence weighed heavily on him. He had promised himself he would never speak about what he witnessed the night Michael Carter died. But every time he looked at Emily, that promise became harder to keep. Far above the gardens, dark clouds slowly gathered over Harrison Manor. Not enough to bring rain, just enough to cast long shadows across the estate. Inside those shadows, old secrets waited. And very soon, someone would be willing to destroy an innocent woman, to keep them buried. The Harrison Foundation Charity Gala was less than 24 hours away. By sunrise, Harrison Manor had transformed into something that looked more like a royal palace than a private residence. Satellite television trucks lined the entrance. Security checkpoints stretched from the front gates to the circular driveway. Luxury cars arrived every few minutes carrying fashion designers, politicians, celebrities, and business executives who wanted one final meeting before the evening's event. Inside the mansion, every servant was under pressure. Every room had to be flawless. Every silver spoon had to shine. Every flower arrangement had to be perfect. One mistake, and Victoria Blake would make sure the entire staff knew about it. Emily had barely slept. The cut on her palm still stung every time she gripped a tray, but she wrapped it with fresh bandages before reporting for duty. She refused to complain. Her grandmother had always told her, life doesn't become easier because you're hurting. You become stronger by choosing not to let the pain make you bitter. Those words had carried Emily through years of hardship. They carried her now. As she stepped into the main kitchen, Grace immediately noticed the bandage. "You should be resting." Emily smiled. "If I rest today, everyone else will have more work." Grace sighed. "You remind me too much of someone." Emily looked curious. "Who?" Grace hesitated. "Billionaire Harrison." Emily blinked. "Mrs. Harrison." Grace nodded slowly. She always put everyone else before herself. Before Emily could respond, Victoria entered the kitchen. The lively atmosphere instantly died. Every employee straightened. Victoria's eyes swept across the room until they landed on Emily. "There you are." Emily stepped forward. "Yes, Miss Blake. I've changed your assignment." Emily nodded. "All right." Instead of helping in the ballroom, Victoria smiled sweetly. "You'll clean my private office." Grace's expression changed. That office was off-limits to nearly everyone. Only Victoria's personal assistant cleaned it. "Miss Blake," Grace said carefully, "Rebecca usually handles." "I know exactly who usually handles it." Victoria never looked at Grace. "I want Emily." Emily felt a strange knot tighten in her stomach. She couldn't explain why. "Yes, Miss Blake." Victoria leaned closer. "And don't touch anything you're not instructed to touch." Her tone was pleasant. Her eyes were not. As Victoria walked away, Grace grabbed Emily's wrist. "Be careful." Emily laughed softly. "I'll just clean." Grace didn't smile. "I have a feeling that's exactly what she wants." Victoria's private office occupied the quietest corner of the mansion's executive wing. Unlike the warm elegance of Billionaire Harrison's old library, this room felt cold. Modern. Precise. Every object seemed placed to impress rather than comfort. Emily quietly began dusting the shelves. She wiped the glass cabinets, straightened the books, polished the desk. Everything looked ordinary, until she reached one locked filing cabinet. She wasn't trying to open it. She simply dusted the outside. As she turned away, she accidentally noticed several folders lying half inside an open briefcase on the sofa. Across the top folder were the words, Harrison Foundation, Emergency Relief Allocation **. Several pages had slipped out. Rows of numbers covered them. Transfers, bank accounts, donation totals. Emily glanced for only a second. Numbers had never interested her. Her father had loved accounting. She hadn't. Still, something caught her eye. The same hospital name appeared 3 times. Each entry showed a different amount. She frowned. That's strange. Before she could think about it further, the office door suddenly opened. Emily quickly stepped back. Victoria stood there. So, her eyes immediately drifted toward the scattered papers. What are you doing? Emily answered honestly. I was cleaning. Were you reading my files? No. Victoria walked toward the briefcase. They're confidential. I know. Then why were you standing here? Emily pointed toward the bookshelf. I was dusting. Victoria stared at her for several seconds. Then, she smiled. Finish cleaning. She closed the briefcase herself. Next time. Her voice became almost a whisper. Keep your eyes where they belong. Emily nodded. I'm sorry if it looked wrong. Victoria said nothing. But inside, her thoughts were racing. She noticed the files. Maybe she hadn't understood them. Maybe she hadn't read them. But Victoria no longer liked the risk. She had spent years eliminating risks. She wasn't about to stop now. That afternoon, Daniel Ross arrived through the private entrance. Victoria locked the office door behind him. We have to speed things up. Daniel frowned. What happened? Emily was in my office. So, she saw part of the foundation reports. Daniel's face hardened. Did she understand them? I don't know. Then why panic? Victoria looked directly at him. Because Ethan keeps defending her. Daniel remained silent. She continued. If those two ever start talking. They won't. You don't know that. Daniel walked toward the window. Below, Ethan was speaking with several maintenance workers. He shook hands with each one before moving on. Daniel sighed. That's his problem. He treats everyone like they're equals. Victoria folded her arms. And that's exactly why Emily is dangerous. Daniel looked back. She's a maid. No. Victoria's voice turned icy. She's becoming someone Ethan trusts. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Finally he asked, What are you thinking? Victoria slowly smiled. If Ethan keeps looking at her, I'll make sure the only thing he sees is a thief. Elsewhere, Ethan was touring one of the estate's maintenance buildings. Unlike most executives, he never skipped conversations with employees. How's your wife's recovery? He asked one mechanic. Much better, sir. I'm glad. Another employee smiled. Most CEOs wouldn't remember that. Ethan shrugged. I'd rather remember people than profit margins. The workers exchanged impressed glances. Watching from nearby, Samuel, the elderly groundskeeper, quietly smiled. Just like your mother. As Ethan prepared to leave, Samuel spoke. Mr. Harrison. Ethan turned. Yes. I've been working here 33 years. I know. Samuel hesitated. There are good people in this house. There are. Sometimes. The old man looked toward the mansion. They're the ones everyone overlooks. Ethan followed his gaze. Emily was helping a young dishwasher carry boxes nearly twice her weight. Samuel didn't say her name. He didn't have to. Ethan understood. That evening, Emily finally returned to the small room she shared with another maid. She pulled an old family photograph from her suitcase. Her parents smiled back at her. Beside them stood her grandmother. The picture had faded over the years. She gently ran her fingers across her father's face. I wish you were here. A memory slowly resurfaced. It was the last Sunday before the accident. Michael Carter had promised to teach her how to balance a household budget. She had laughed. Dad, I hate math. He laughed too. You don't have to love numbers. You just have to know when numbers are lying. At the time, the sentence had sounded meaningless. Now, for reasons she couldn't explain, it echoed in her heart. Without realizing it, Emily had just remembered the second piece of advice her father left behind. The first had been, no amount of money is worth losing your soul. The second, numbers can lie. Neither lesson would make sense. Until it was almost too late. Across the mansion, Richard Harrison stood inside his private study with Ethan. I've been thinking. Richard poured 2 glasses of whiskey. After the gala, I want you to begin overseeing the Harrison Foundation. Ethan looked surprised. The foundation. Richard nodded. It's time. You'll eventually control the company. You should understand every part of it. Outside the closed study door, Victoria had been walking past. She froze. Her breathing slowed. She hadn't intended to eavesdrop. But those few words were enough. Overseeing the foundation. Her heart pounded. If Ethan examined the books, years of fraud would unravel. Everything she had built, everything she had stolen, everything she had killed to protect, could disappear. For the first time in years, Victoria felt something she almost never allowed herself to feel. Fear, real fear, and fear would soon push her beyond manipulation, into something far darker. By 6 o'clock that evening, Harrison Manor no longer looked like a private residence. It looked like the center of America's elite. Luxury vehicles rolled through the front gates one after another, their polished bodies reflecting rows of flashing cameras. Security officers in tailored suits stood at every entrance, while television reporters delivered live broadcasts from the front lawn. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers bathed everything in golden light. An orchestra softly played classical music. Champagne flowed. Laughter echoed through the hall. To the guests, it was another glamorous Harrison Foundation charity gala, celebrating generosity and compassion. To Victoria Blake, it was the perfect stage to fool the world one more time. Standing beside Richard Harrison, she welcomed senators, governors, CEOs, movie stars, and foreign ambassadors with flawless grace. Thank you for supporting the Harrison Foundation, she said with a warm smile that looked completely genuine. The cameras adored her. So did the guests. No one saw the cold calculation hidden behind her eyes. Across the ballroom, Daniel Ross quietly moved among the executives, shaking hands as though his only concern was the company's financial future. But every few minutes, his eyes drifted toward Victoria. She responded with almost invisible nods. No words. No suspicious movements. Years of working together had taught them how to communicate without attracting attention. Tonight wasn't just another gala. It was the last major charity event before Ethan officially began reviewing the foundation's finances. Neither of them intended to let that happen. In the servants' corridor, Emily adjusted the cuffs of her uniform and took a deep breath. Grace handed her a silver tray filled with champagne flutes. "Stay in the East Wing," Grace instructed quietly. "The VIP guests prefer being served there." Emily nodded. "I understand." Grace looked into her eyes. "And if Miss Blake gives you another assignment?" She paused. "Come find me first." Emily smiled reassuringly. "I'll be fine." Grace wasn't convinced. She had worked inside Harrison Manor for nearly 28 years. Experience had taught her to trust her instincts. And every instinct she had was screaming that something terrible was about to happen. The ballroom buzzed with conversation as Emily carefully moved among the guests. She kept her eyes lowered, offering drinks with quiet professionalism. Most guests barely noticed her. A few smiled politely. Others treated her as though she were invisible. She didn't mind. Her grandmother had once told her, "Your value isn't decided by the people who fail to see it." Emily carried those words everywhere. Near the grand staircase, she stopped beside an elderly woman wearing an elegant navy blue gown. The woman accepted a glass of champagne and smiled. "Thank you, dear." "You're welcome, ma'am." The woman studied Emily for a moment. "You have kind eyes." Emily looked surprised. "Thank you. My late husband used to say you can recognize a person's heart before they ever speak." Emily smiled politely before continuing toward another group of guests. Unbeknownst to her, the elderly woman was Margaret Whitmore, a longtime Harrison family friend and one of Richard Harrison's most trusted board members. Margaret watched Emily walk away. Something about the young maid reminded her of Billionaire Harrison. Not in appearance, in spirit. It was a feeling she couldn't explain. That brief impression would matter much later. At the opposite end of the ballroom, Ethan stood with several international investors discussing renewable energy projects. The conversation flowed smoothly. The acquisition he had recently completed had impressed everyone. One investor raised his glass. "Mr. Harrison, your father built an empire." He smiled. "But I think you'll build something even bigger." Ethan answered modestly. "I'd rather build something that lasts." Richard overheard the remark and smiled with quiet pride. For a brief moment, he imagined the future. His son leading Harrison Global. Victoria beside him. The Harrison legacy secure for another generation. He had no idea the people standing closest to him were already pulling that future apart. Victoria excused herself from the guests and disappeared into a private hallway. Daniel was already waiting. "It's almost time," he said. Victoria glanced at her diamond watch. "Has everything been moved?" Daniel nodded. "The Shell account transfer finished an hour ago." "And the diamonds?" "They're in the security vault." Victoria smiled. "Not for long." Daniel looked uneasy. "This is becoming risky." She stepped closer. "No. It's becoming necessary." He lowered his voice. "If this goes wrong." "It won't." "And the maid?" Victoria's expression hardened. "Emily Carter is about to become the perfect criminal." Daniel studied her face. He had seen Victoria manipulate people. He had seen her forge signatures. He had watched her destroy careers without remorse. But tonight, something was different. There was no hesitation left. Only determination. Even he began wondering how far she was willing to go. Meanwhile, Emily entered the west corridor carrying fresh linens requested by one of the guest suites. As she rounded the corner, she nearly collided with Ethan. "Oh!" She stepped back immediately. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison." Ethan smiled. "I think this is the third time you've apologized to me." Emily laughed nervously. "I keep running into you. Or maybe I'm always walking where you're working." She smiled. "Maybe." For a brief second, the noise of the gala seemed to disappear. Ethan noticed the bandage still wrapped around her hand. "How's your hand?" "It's healing." "You should have taken the evening off." Emily shook her head. "Grace needed everyone. You always seem to put everyone else first." She lowered her eyes. "My grandmother raised me that way." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "My mother did the same." The mention of Alina created another quiet connection between them. Neither realized Victoria had turned the corner just in time to see the conversation. She didn't hear every word. She didn't need to. She saw Ethan smiling. She saw Emily smiling back. That was enough. Her jaw tightened. Inside, jealousy twisted into something darker. Hatred. Not because Emily had done anything wrong, but because she represented something Victoria could never buy. Genuine goodness. And deep down, Victoria feared that goodness more than wealth. As the evening continued, Samuel, the elderly groundskeeper, quietly moved through the gardens checking decorative lights. One of the younger workers approached him. "You've been staring at the mansion all night." Samuel sighed. "I've lived here most of my life. And I've learned something." "What?" "The biggest storms usually arrive on the prettiest days." The younger man laughed. "It doesn't even look like rain." Samuel slowly looked toward the glowing ballroom. "I'm not talking about the weather." His words lingered in the night air. Narratively, Samuel's unease wasn't random. Decades earlier, he had seen Michael Carter leave the estate carrying a brown envelope the night before the fatal brake failure. He had dismissed it as ordinary business at the time. Years of guilt had convinced him that his silence might have allowed evil to survive. That memory had become a burden he carried alone, and every time he looked at Emily, the resemblance to her father made that burden heavier. He still wasn't ready to speak, but the audience now understood why his hesitation mattered. Inside the mansion, Victoria entered the security office with effortless confidence. The chief of security immediately stood. "Miss Blake." She smiled warmly. "Mr. Harrison asked me to check the charity auction jewels before the presentation." The man nodded. "Of course." He unlocked the vault. Inside rested several velvet cases containing priceless diamonds donated for auction. Victoria admired them for a moment. "They're beautiful." "They're worth nearly $5 million, the guard replied proudly. "I'll only be a minute." The guard stepped outside to answer a radio call. Exactly as Victoria had anticipated. The instant the door closed, her pleasant expression vanished. She opened one velvet case, carefully removed the diamonds, then slipped them into an identical black pouch hidden inside her designer handbag. From another compartment, she removed a second pouch filled with expertly crafted replicas. Within seconds, the switch was complete. She closed the case. Everything looked exactly the same. When the guard returned, he noticed nothing unusual. "Everything all right, Miss Blake?" She smiled sweetly. "Perfect." As she walked away, her fingers tightened around the real diamonds hidden inside her handbag. The first stage of her plan had begun. Emily, completely unaware, was walking straight toward the trap that would destroy her life. The orchestra reached the final notes of another elegant performance as applause rolled through the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above hundreds of distinguished guests dressed in tuxedos and designer gowns. Waiters glided silently between conversations, while television crews captured every glamorous moment for the evening news. To the cameras, it was the perfect charity gala. To Victoria Blake, it was the perfect crime scene. She stood beside Richard Harrison with effortless elegance, greeting donors as though nothing weighed on her mind. Inside, every second felt like the ticking of a clock. The real diamonds rested inside a velvet pouch, hidden beneath the false bottom of her designer handbag. She had rehearsed this moment countless times. Not once had she imagined feeling nervous. Yet Ethan's growing interest in Emily had changed everything. The maid wasn't part of the original plan. She had become the plan. Emily carried another tray of champagne through the ballroom, carefully weaving between guests. Her feet ached. Her injured palm throbbed beneath its fresh bandage. Still, she smiled whenever someone thanked her. Across the room, Margaret Whitmore watched quietly. Another board member chuckled. "You've been watching that young maid all evening." Margaret smiled. "Have I?" "You have. What do you see?" Margaret looked toward Emily. "A person." The executive laughed. "They're all people." "No." Margaret slowly shook her head. "Most people become different when they think nobody important is watching." "And her? She behaves exactly the same." The executive followed her gaze. Emily had stopped to help an elderly guest who had accidentally dropped his walking cane. No cameras. No applause. No recognition. She simply helped him before quietly returning to work. Margaret smiled. Character like that can't be bought. Those words quietly planted another witness, who would later question the accusations against Emily. At the opposite end of the ballroom, Ethan stood beside his father. Richard looked genuinely pleased. "I haven't seen this many donors in years. The foundation's reputation has grown." Richard nodded proudly. "Victoria deserves a lot of credit." Ethan glanced toward Victoria, greeting another group of guests. "Maybe." Richard noticed the hesitation. "You don't sound convinced." "I'm just saying the foundation belongs to everyone who works for it." Richard smiled. "That's exactly why you're ready to lead it." Those words lingered longer than Richard intended. Across the room, Victoria overheard them. Her heartbeat quickened. Lead it. She couldn't allow that future to happen. Not after everything she and Daniel had done. Daniel Ross quietly checked his watch. 9:17 p.m. He looked toward Victoria. She gave the smallest nod. It was time. Without attracting attention, Daniel slipped into the executive hallway leading toward the administrative offices. Years of careful planning had taught him exactly where every security camera pointed. Exactly which hallways remained empty during major events. Exactly how long each opportunity lasted. Inside the accounting office, he unlocked his laptop. Within minutes, he began altering financial records. Transfers disappeared. Account histories changed. Authorization logs were rewritten. Every digital trail leading to the missing charity funds slowly shifted toward newly created shell accounts. Accounts prepared weeks earlier. Accounts waiting for one final name. Emily Carter. The audience still didn't know exactly how Daniel intended to connect those accounts to Emily. But the pieces were quietly moving into place. Meanwhile, Victoria approached Emily carrying the warm smile every guest admired. There you are. Emily immediately stopped. Yes, Miss Blake. I need a favor. Of course. My emerald shawl is upstairs in my dressing room. She handed Emily a small gold key. Could you bring it to me? Emily accepted the key. Certainly. It's hanging beside the wardrobe. I'll be right back. Victoria smiled warmly. Thank you. Emily hurried toward the grand staircase. As soon as she disappeared from sight, Victoria's pleasant smile vanished. She turned toward Daniel's waiting text message. She's moving. Victoria quietly followed. The upstairs hallway was almost empty. Most guests remained downstairs enjoying the gala. Emily reached Victoria's luxurious suite. She unlocked the door. The room smelled faintly of expensive perfume and fresh lilies. Everything appeared exactly as Victoria had described. The emerald shawl hung beside the wardrobe. Emily picked it up, then paused. The room felt oddly disturbed. One dresser drawer remained slightly open. A jewelry box sat crooked on the vanity. She assumed someone had searched for accessories before the gala. It wasn't her place to ask questions. She turned toward the door. Unknown to her, behind the partially open walk-in closet door, Victoria silently watched. She waited until Emily stepped into the hallway. Then she moved. In less than 15 seconds, Victoria crossed the room, opened her designer handbag, removed the velvet pouch containing the real diamonds, walked to the servant's laundry basket positioned near the bedroom entrance, lifted one neatly folded maid's apron, slipped the pouch deep inside, then carefully covered it with fresh towels. That particular laundry basket belonged to Emily. Victoria herself had arranged for it to be delivered there earlier that afternoon under the excuse of replacing damaged uniforms. Every step had been prepared, every movement calculated. She closed the basket, straightened the towels, adjusted the room exactly as it had been, then quietly exited through the connecting dressing room door before Emily returned. The entire operation lasted less than a minute. No witnesses. No fingerprints left where they shouldn't be. No obvious trace. Except one. As Victoria hurried through the connecting hallway, the clasp on her diamond bracelet snagged briefly against the edge of the laundry basket. A tiny decorative emerald loosened and dropped unnoticed beneath the cabinet. She never heard it hit the floor. Neither did Emily. But the audience did. It was a small detail, one that would matter much later. Emily returned downstairs carrying the emerald shawl. There you are, Victoria said warmly as though nothing had happened. Thank you. Emily handed it over. Is there anything else? Victoria smiled. No. You've been very helpful. Emily nodded politely before walking away. Victoria watched her disappear into the crowd. Soon, you'll never walk these halls again. An hour later, the charity auction began. Richard Harrison stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Harrison Foundation, thank you for another year of changing lives. Thunderous applause erupted. Television cameras focused on the display cases containing the donated jewels. The security chief approached the stage. He unlocked the largest velvet case. Then, his face froze. His hand stopped moving. He looked again. His expression turned white. Richard noticed immediately. Is something wrong? The security chief swallowed hard. He looked inside once more. The Harrison Diamond Collection. His voice cracked. It's gone. The ballroom fell silent. For one heartbeat. Nobody moved. Then chaos exploded. What? That's impossible. Lock the doors. Security officers rushed toward every exit. Guests began shouting over one another. Television cameras swung wildly from face to face. Victoria clutched Richard's arm. My God, she whispered with perfectly rehearsed horror. Who would do such a thing? Across the ballroom, Emily stood frozen, completely unaware that the nightmare destroying her life had just begun. The applause inside Harrison Manor died so suddenly that the silence felt louder than the orchestra had moments before. The chief of security stood frozen beside the empty display case. His face had gone completely pale. The Harrison diamonds, he whispered. They're gone. A wave of disbelief swept through the ballroom. Reporters immediately raised their microphones. Guests instinctively reached for their phones. Within seconds, security officers moved into position, quietly but firmly locking every entrance to the estate. The heavy bronze doors shut one after another. No one spoke. Richard Harrison slowly stepped onto the stage. For nearly 40 years, he had built an empire by remaining calm while everyone else panicked. His expression never changed. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice steady enough to settle the room, I understand this is disturbing, but no one leaves this estate until we recover the diamonds. Every guest, every employee, every executive, including my own family, will cooperate fully. Several wealthy donors exchanged uneasy glances. One senator looked offended. Richard met his eyes without blinking. No exceptions. The senator slowly nodded. Emily felt her knees weaken. She had never seen the mansion this quiet. Grace leaned close enough that only Emily could hear. Keep breathing. Emily swallowed hard. I didn't do anything. I know. Grace squeezed her hand. But tonight may not matter what we know. The searches began immediately. Guests first. Nothing. Then executives. Nothing. Richard himself emptied his pockets. Nothing. Victoria calmly removed her jewelry, handbag and evening shawl for inspection. Everything appeared normal. Nothing. Daniel Ross submitted to a search. Nothing. Finally, the household staff. Emily stepped forward without hesitation. She emptied her apron. A folded photograph. A small notebook. Ethan's freshly laundered handkerchief. Nothing else. A female officer searched every seam of her uniform. Every pocket. Every shoe. She stepped back. Clear. A murmur spread across the ballroom. Victoria felt her stomach tighten. That wasn't possible. She had personally hidden the diamonds. Daniel discreetly caught her eye. His expression revealed the same confusion. The evidence had vanished. Richard exhaled slowly. Continue searching the estate. Security teams immediately divided into groups. One searched the servants' quarters. Another swept the executive offices. Another checked every vehicle. Ethan quietly observed the operation. Then something caught his attention. One of the security supervisors approached the chief. Sir, what is it? The surveillance system. What about it? It shows something strange. The supervisor connected a tablet to the ballroom projector. Security footage appeared on the massive screen. Everyone watched. The timestamp read **8:51 p.m. Emily entered the west hallway carrying Victoria's emerald shawl. Exactly as expected. She disappeared into Victoria's suite. 32 seconds later. She emerged carrying only the shawl, then walked directly back toward the ballroom. The chief nodded. So, the supervisor frowned. Watch carefully. The footage replayed in slow motion. Emily entered. Emily exited. Nobody else appeared. No one entered after her, the supervisor said. The hallway remained empty. Victoria immediately relaxed. Perfect. Then, the supervisor continued. Until this. The screen jumped forward 3 minutes. The same hallway. Still empty. Then, the bedroom door slowly opened by itself. A collective gasp filled the ballroom. Nobody walked out. The door simply drifted open, then closed again. The supervisor looked puzzled. Our motion sensors detected movement, but the camera shows no one. Guests whispered nervously. A hidden door. A secret passage. Richard frowned. There are no hidden passages in the renovated wing. Samuel, standing near the back of the room, suddenly looked frightened. Very frightened. His grip tightened around his walking cane. Daniel's phone vibrated. A single encrypted message appeared. The passage is compromised. His face lost all color. He deleted the message immediately. Victoria noticed. What? He whispered without looking at her. Someone else knows. Her heartbeat stopped. Someone else. Impossible. Only 2 people knew about the concealed service corridor, connecting the old servants' wing to the executive suites. Or so they believed. Before Victoria could process the message, another security officer ran into the ballroom. Chief, we found the diamonds. Emily froze. The entire room turned. Where? The officer held up a black velvet pouch. In the East Laundry corridor. Victoria nearly smiled. Finally. Then the officer continued. They weren't hidden. Confused silence. They were lying in the middle of the hallway. Richard frowned. What? It looked. The officer hesitated. Like someone had dropped them while running. The ballroom erupted. Richard looked at Ethan. What do you make of that? Ethan answered without hesitation. If Emily intended to steal $5 million worth of diamonds, why would she leave them in the middle of a hallway during a lockdown? Nobody answered. Even the security officers exchanged uncertain looks. It made no sense. Daniel stepped forward quickly. Perhaps she panicked. Ethan turned toward him. Then explained something else. What? Ethan pointed toward the evidence bag. The pouch. Daniel looked confused. What about it? Emily's fingerprints should be all over it. The chief nodded. We'll know after forensic testing. Ethan shook his head. No. He walked toward the evidence bag. Without touching it, he leaned closer. The clasp. Everyone looked. It's broken. The chief frowned. So whoever handled it recently lost part of the clasp. Victoria instinctively looked down at her bracelet. Her heart nearly stopped. One emerald stone was missing. She slowly lowered her hand before anyone else noticed. Then everything became even worse. A young forensic analyst hurried into the ballroom carrying another tablet. Mr. Harrison, we've recovered deleted network logs. Daniel felt his pulse race. The analyst continued. The fraudulent charity account wasn't created tonight. Richard looked surprised. When? The analyst enlarged the records. 6 months ago. Gasps filled the room. Someone has been preparing this identity for months. Emily stared at the screen in horror. I've never seen any of this. Ethan quietly studied every timestamp, every authorization, every login. His eyes narrowed. Then, he looked directly at Daniel. You approved the cybersecurity budget 6 months ago. Daniel forced a smile. I approve hundreds of budgets. I'm aware. So what are you implying? Nothing. Ethan paused. Yet, before another word could be spoken, Samuel suddenly shouted, Stop! The entire ballroom turned. The old groundskeeper was shaking violently. His eyes were fixed on the surveillance screen. He wasn't looking at Emily. He wasn't looking at Victoria. He was staring at the hallway footage. His lips trembled. I know that door. Richard looked confused. What door? Samuel pointed toward the frozen surveillance image. His voice cracked. That wasn't built by your father. Silence. It was built by your grandfather. Victoria's blood ran cold. Samuel continued. It leads to the original accounting office, before the mansion was renovated. Ethan stepped closer. Samuel, what are you saying? The old man looked directly into Ethan's eyes. I'm saying, someone has been using that passage for over 20 years. The ballroom went silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Samuel slowly turned, pointing a trembling finger. Not at Emily. Not at Daniel. Not even at Victoria. He pointed at Richard Harrison. Richard's face drained of color. Samuel, what are you doing? Samuel's voice broke. You may not remember, but your signature was the last one Michael Carter saw. Before he could finish, a deafening gunshot echoed from somewhere outside the mansion. Bang! Every light in the ballroom flickered. Guests screamed. Security officers drew their weapons. Another shot echoed across the estate. Bang! The ballroom descended into chaos. In the confusion, Samuel collapsed. Not from a bullet. Not from poison. From the overwhelming strain of finally speaking after carrying 20 years of fear. As paramedics rushed toward him, Ethan stood frozen. He wasn't thinking about the diamonds anymore. He wasn't thinking about Emily. He wasn't even thinking about Victoria. One sentence echoed through his mind. Your signature was the last one Michael Carter saw. If Samuel was telling the truth, then everything Ethan believed about his family was built on a lie. The first gunshot left the ballroom in stunned silence. The second shattered it. Guests screamed and ducked beneath banquet tables. Crystal glasses crashed onto the marble floor. Security officers drew their weapons and rushed toward the front entrance while others surrounded Richard Harrison and the board members. Seal the estate, the chief of security shouted into his radio. Nobody in or out, every gate, every perimeter. Ethan ignored the chaos. His eyes remained fixed on Samuel, whose frail body lay motionless on the polished floor. Samuel. He dropped to one knee. The old groundskeeper's breathing was shallow but steady. A doctor attending the gala hurried over and checked him. He's alive. What happened? Ethan demanded. The stress was too much. His heart is under severe strain. Richard looked toward the security chief. Get him to the hospital. Before the paramedics could lift Samuel onto the stretcher, the old man suddenly grabbed Ethan's wrist with surprising strength. His cloudy eyes opened. Don't. His voice barely escaped his lips. Let. He coughed violently. A them. Ethan leaned closer. Who? Samuel struggled to breathe. A burn. The. His grip loosened. The sentence died with it. He slipped back into unconsciousness. Ethan looked frustrated. Burn the what? The satchel. Documents. Evidence. Or something else entirely. Outside the mansion, security teams swept the grounds. No shooter. No weapon. No injured guards. One officer radioed back. We found something. What? A spent rifle casing near the north tree line. Another voice interrupted. No footprints. The chief frowned. No footprints. It looks like whoever fired the shots knew exactly where our cameras couldn't see. The report reached Richard. His expression darkened. This wasn't random. Someone hadn't come to steal. Someone had come to interrupt. Back inside the ballroom, the surveillance team replayed every second of the security footage again. Emily stood quietly beside Grace, still surrounded by officers. Nobody had handcuffed her. Not yet. The forensic analyst zoomed in on the hallway outside Victoria's suite. There. He paused the video. Ethan stepped closer. What am I looking at? The analyst enlarged the image. A faint shadow stretched across the wall near the bedroom door. Richard frowned. That's a reflection. The analyst shook his head. No. He switched to another camera angle. The shadow disappeared. Then he overlaid both camera feeds. The room fell silent. There had been someone standing just outside the camera's field of view. Hidden perfectly in the blind spot. Not invisible. Intentional. Ethan looked at the chief of security. Who designed this camera layout? The chief hesitated. The renovation contractor. When? About 7 years ago. Ethan turned toward Richard. Who approved it? Richard thought for a moment. I honestly don't remember. Victoria felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She remembered. Because she had insisted on preserving that exact blind spot, claiming the antique wall molding made another camera impossible to install. Nobody had questioned her. Until now. Daniel stepped forward before anyone could think further. Even if someone used the blind spot, we still have the diamonds. He pointed toward the evidence bag. They were recovered inside the estate. Ethan looked at him calmly. Recovered. Not found on Emily. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's a distinction without a difference. I disagree. Ethan folded his arms. If someone wanted to escape with $5 million in diamonds, why abandon them before reaching an exit? Nobody answered. Margaret Whitmore quietly spoke from the crowd. He's right. Every head turned. The veteran board member stepped forward. I've spent 30 years investigating corporate fraud. She looked directly at Richard. When criminals panic, they hide evidence. She looked toward the evidence bag. They don't leave it in the middle of a hallway where the first security patrol can find it. Several directors exchanged uneasy glances. Richard's certainty began to crack. Just then, another forensic officer entered carrying a transparent evidence case. Chief. What now? We processed the velvet pouch. Richard immediately asked. Fingerprints. The officer nodded. We found several. Emily closed her eyes. Victoria silently smiled. This was it. The officer continued. But the smile vanished from Victoria's face. We didn't find Miss Carter's fingerprints. The ballroom froze. Daniel blinked. What? The officer repeated himself. There are no identifiable fingerprints belonging to Emily Carter. Hope flickered across Emily's face. Grace grabbed her hand. I told you. Richard looked relieved. Then the officer finished his report. The pouch had been wiped clean. Silence returned. Someone had deliberately removed every usable print. Hope disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. Another reversal. Another dead end. Ethan walked slowly across the ballroom. His mind pieced together the facts. No fingerprints. No diamonds on Emily. A cloned financial identity. A hidden blind spot. A 20-year-old secret. And gunshots fired the moment Samuel tried to speak. None of it pointed toward a frightened young maid. It pointed toward someone patient, organized, powerful, someone who planned months ahead. He stopped walking, then turned to the chief of security. I want every member of the executive staff interviewed tonight. Daniel immediately objected. That's unnecessary. Ethan looked at him. Why? We have evidence. We have planted evidence. Daniel's eyes narrowed. You sound very certain. I am. Richard stepped between them. Enough. The room fell silent. Richard looked at Ethan. Do you have proof? No. Then we're dealing with facts. Ethan answered quietly. No. We're dealing with appearances. At that moment, one of the younger security officers rushed into the ballroom carrying a small antique brass key sealed inside an evidence bag. Sir. The chief turned. Where did you get that? It was found near the old library. Ethan frowned. The old library. Yes. The officer looked at his notes. It appears someone dropped it while running through the west corridor during the confusion. Richard examined the key. His face changed instantly. I know this key. Ethan looked at him. It belongs to your mother's writing desk. A hush swept through the room. Samuel's final conscious words echoed in Ethan's mind. Don't let them burn. And before that, your mother's. Now the key to Billionaire Harrison's desk had mysteriously appeared on the same night Samuel tried to reveal the truth. It couldn't be a coincidence. Unless someone had already been inside the library. Someone searching for whatever Samuel believed still existed. Ethan slowly closed his hand around the evidence bag. For the first time all evening, he stopped trying to prove Emily innocent. Instead, he began asking a far more dangerous question. What had his mother discovered before she died? Across the ballroom, Victoria watched Ethan holding the key. A wave of genuine fear spread through her. She had searched Billionaire's desk years ago. Or at least, she thought she had. Now she wasn't so sure. And if Billionaire Harrison had hidden something that even Victoria had missed, then the game was about to change. The antique brass key felt unexpectedly heavy in Ethan Harrison's hand. The ballroom had fallen silent again. Guests who had been eager to leave minutes earlier now stood frozen, sensing they were witnessing something much bigger than the theft of a priceless diamond collection. Richard stared at the key. I haven't seen that in 15 years. Ethan looked at his father. You said it belonged to Mom's writing desk. Richard nodded slowly. It did. I thought it disappeared after your mother's funeral. Victoria felt her pulse quicken. She kept her expression calm, but her mind raced. How did that key suddenly appear? She remembered searching Billionaire Harrison's library herself after the funeral. Every drawer, every cabinet, every bookshelf. She had found nothing. Or so she believed. The chief of security stepped forward. "Mr. Harrison, should we secure the library?" Richard looked toward Ethan. Before he could answer, Victoria spoke. "I don't think that's necessary." Every head turned toward her. She smiled gently. "Eleanor's library has been locked for years. I don't see how it relates to tonight." Ethan looked at her. "You don't?" Victoria shook her head. "We're investigating stolen diamonds, not old family memories." Ethan calmly slipped the key into his pocket. Sometimes the oldest memories answer the newest questions. Victoria's smile faded for barely a second. Richard made his decision. "Clear the library. No one enters except Ethan, myself, and the chief of security." Daniel immediately objected. "Shouldn't we wait until morning?" Richard frowned. "Why? It's almost midnight." Ethan answered before Daniel could continue. "If someone dropped this key tonight, then someone was already looking for something." Richard nodded. "We're going now." Daniel quietly lowered his eyes. His heartbeat quickened. For the first time all evening, things were moving beyond his control. Across the ballroom, Emily remained surrounded by 2 security officers. Although no one had formally arrested her, she wasn't free to leave. Grace stood beside her. Emily's eyes followed Ethan as he walked toward the west hallway. "Do you think he'll find something?" Grace answered honestly. "I don't know." Emily lowered her head. "I just want the truth." Grace gently held her shoulder. The truth usually takes longer than lies. The group reached the old library. Dust covered the carved oak doors. The room had remained almost untouched since Eleanor Harrison's death. Richard hesitated before placing his hand on the handle. "I haven't been in here for years." His voice carried a quiet sadness. He slowly pushed the door open. The familiar scent of old books and polished wood filled the air. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating shelves lined with leather-bound journals and family photographs. Everything appeared exactly as Eleanor had left it. Except, Ethan noticed something immediately. The writing desk. One drawer wasn't fully closed. He exchanged a quick glance with the chief of security. "You checked this room recently?" The chief shook his head. "No, sir." Richard frowned. "I always kept it locked." Ethan walked toward the desk. He inserted the brass key. The lock clicked open effortlessly. Someone had recently oiled the mechanism. Ethan noticed the fresh lubricant around the keyhole. So did the chief. "This lock has been used." Richard looked confused. "That's impossible. No one had the key." Ethan quietly replied. "Apparently someone did." He slowly opened the top drawer. Inside lay neatly arranged letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Family photographs. Old notebooks. Nothing unusual. Richard smiled sadly. "Those are your mother's personal letters." Ethan carefully searched each compartment. Still nothing. Victoria, standing just outside the doorway with Daniel, allowed herself to breathe again. "Nothing." Then, Ethan paused. He tapped the bottom of the drawer. "Hollow." The chief looked surprised. "What?" Ethan knocked again. The sound was unmistakable. There was empty space beneath the wooden base. Richard frowned. "I never knew." Ethan carefully ran his fingers along the edge. A tiny spring clicked. The false bottom lifted. Everyone stared. Hidden beneath it rested a thin leather journal and a sealed brown envelope. Across the hallway, Victoria's face drained of color. "No." She whispered under her breath. She had searched the desk years ago. She had never found the hidden compartment. Ethan picked up the journal first. The cover bore elegant handwriting. Billionaire Harrison. His mother's personal journal. Richard swallowed hard. I've never seen that before. Ethan opened the first page. Most entries described family memories. Birthdays. Vacations. Conversations with Richard. Then, halfway through the journal, the tone changed. Ethan read aloud. Something is terribly wrong with the Foundation's disaster relief accounts. The room became silent. Michael says the numbers don't balance. Richard frowned. Michael. Ethan answered quietly. Michael Carter. Emily's father. Richard looked genuinely shocked. That's impossible. Ethan continued reading. Michael refused to alter the financial records. He believes someone inside the company is stealing from the Foundation. Daniel felt sweat forming on his forehead. Victoria slowly stepped backward. She wanted to leave, but doing so would draw attention. Ethan turned another page. I told Richard we should investigate immediately. Richard interrupted. I don't remember this. Ethan looked at him. You never saw the journal. Richard remained silent. The next page had been torn out. So had the next. And the next. Nearly 20 consecutive pages were missing. The chief frowned. Someone removed them. Richard whispered. Recently. Ethan examined the torn edges. No. They were removed years ago. Victoria silently closed her eyes. Those pages. She remembered burning them after Alina's funeral. She had believed she destroyed every dangerous word Alina had ever written. But she had missed the journal itself. Then Ethan reached the final intact page. His expression changed. What is it? Richard asked. Ethan slowly read. If anything happens to Michael. He paused, then continued. The original ledger is not in my desk. Richard looked confused. What ledger? Ethan finished the sentence. Only Samuel knows where I hid it. The room froze. Samuel. The man who had collapsed before revealing the truth. The same man now fighting for his life at the hospital. Suddenly, everything connected. Samuel hadn't been trying to expose a rumor. He had been protecting evidence. Real evidence. Evidence Billionaire Harrison had trusted him to keep. Ethan closed the journal. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with determination. I'm going to the hospital. Richard looked at him. Why? Because if Samuel wakes up, he becomes the most important witness in this entire investigation. Neither Ethan nor Richard noticed Victoria quietly reaching into her evening purse. She pulled out her phone beneath the edge of her shawl, shielding the screen from everyone else. She typed a single message. Finish what should have been finished 20 years ago. She pressed *send****. The recipient's name wasn't visible. Only a single initial. R. As the message disappeared. Somewhere in the darkness outside Harrison Manor, a black SUV slowly started its engine and turned toward the city hospital. The black SUV slipped silently onto the highway. Its headlights cut through the darkness as it headed toward St. Gabriel Medical Center, where Samuel had been rushed only minutes earlier. Inside the vehicle, the driver never spoke. A phone rested on the passenger seat. The screen displayed only one unread message. Finish what should have been finished 20 years ago. No name. No number. Just a single initial. R. The driver deleted the message, then pressed harder on the accelerator. Back at Harrison Manor, the ballroom had emptied of reporters, but no one had been allowed to leave the estate. Security officers remained stationed at every entrance. The celebration had become an active crime scene. Emily sat alone in a small waiting room adjacent to the security office. She had not been handcuffed, but she wasn't free. Her eyes were red from crying. She replayed every moment of the evening over and over. Victoria asking her to retrieve the emerald shawl, cleaning the office, walking through the west hallway, returning downstairs. Nothing made sense. How had the diamonds ended up inside the estate? Why had someone stolen her identity months earlier? She buried her face in her hands. I don't understand. Grace quietly entered the room carrying a cup of tea. You should drink something. Emily forced a weak smile. I'm not sure I can. Grace sat beside her. I've watched people lie for nearly 3 decades in this house. Emily looked up. And I've also watched innocent people blame themselves. Emily's voice trembled. What if nobody believes me? Grace reached into her apron and gently squeezed Emily's hand. Then we'll find someone who believes the truth more than appearances. At that same moment, Richard Harrison stood alone in his study. The leather journal lay open before him. He stared at Alina's handwriting as though hearing her voice for the first time in 15 years. His mind drifted backward. A memory surfaced. Alina standing in this very room 1 week before her death. Richard, Michael says the numbers don't match. He had barely looked up from a merger agreement. We'll have auditors handle it. This feels bigger than accounting. We'll deal with it after the board meeting. He remembered kissing her forehead before leaving. He never asked about it again. Days later, Michael Carter died in what police ruled a brake failure. Weeks later, Alina became withdrawn. Months later, she passed away after a long illness. Richard had always believed the tragedies were unrelated. Now, for the first time, he wondered whether he had ignored the most important warning of his life. Ethan didn't wait. He grabbed his car keys. I'm going to the hospital. The chief of security stepped forward. I'll send an escort. No. Ethan shook his head. I'll get there faster alone. Richard stopped him. Ethan. He turned. If Samuel wakes up. Richard hesitated. Don't tell him what we found. Ethan frowned. Why not? I want to hear his story. Before he knows ours. Ethan studied his father. It was sound reasoning. Samuel's testimony would be stronger if it came unprompted. He nodded once. I understand. Then he left. Outside the mansion, Victoria watched Ethan's car disappear through the front gates. Daniel approached quietly. This is falling apart. Victoria didn't answer. He found Alina's journal. Silence. He knows about Michael. Still silence. Daniel lowered his voice. What if Samuel talks? Victoria finally looked at him. He won't. You sound very confident. I'm trying to be. Daniel stared at her. For the first time in years, he saw fear behind her confidence. Real fear. Not fear of prison. Fear of losing control. He made a decision. One he had been considering for months. If Victoria's empire collapsed, he would make sure he wasn't buried beneath it. Quietly, without her noticing, he copied several encrypted files from his phone onto a hidden cloud server. Insurance. If she betrayed him, he would betray her first. Neither of them realized that the partnership built on greed had just begun to fracture. 25 minutes later, Ethan's car pulled into the hospital parking lot. Red and blue emergency lights reflected off the glass entrance. 2 police officers stood outside Samuel's room. Ethan immediately sensed something was wrong. He approached the nurse's station. "I'm Ethan Harrison. I need to see Samuel Brooks." The nurse's expression changed. "I'm sorry, sir. Visitors aren't allowed right now." "Why?" "Someone already tried." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Before she could answer, a detective stepped out of Samuel's room. "You Mr. Harrison?" "Yes. I'm Detective Laura Bennett." She extended her badge. "We've just had a very unusual incident." Ethan's pulse quickened. "What happened?" The detective held up a small evidence bag. Inside was a syringe. "It wasn't used. We found it hidden beneath Samuel's hospital bed." Ethan stared at it. "Someone tried to inject him." "We don't know. But whoever entered his room wasn't a doctor." A cold silence settled between them. Samuel hadn't simply collapsed. Someone wanted to make absolutely certain he never spoke. The detective continued. "Our surveillance cameras captured someone wearing hospital scrubs entering the intensive care unit." "Did you identify them?" She nodded slowly. "We thought we had." She handed Ethan a printed still image. The figure wore a surgical mask, cap, and gloves. The face was impossible to recognize. But one detail stood out. On the person's wrist, a distinctive diamond bracelet. One emerald stone was missing. Ethan's eyes narrowed. His mind immediately returned to the broken clasp. The missing emerald recovered at Harrison Manor. This wasn't proof. Not yet. But it was the strongest connection he'd seen all night. Back at Harrison Manor, Victoria entered her bedroom and quietly locked the door. She walked to the mirror. Her hands trembled as she removed her jewelry. Then, she froze. Her bracelet. The missing emerald. "No," she whispered. She searched the carpet. The vanity. Her handbag. Nothing. The stone was gone. A flash of memory struck her. Emily's laundry basket. The clasp snagging. The tiny click she had ignored. For the first time since framing Emily, Victoria realized she had left behind something that forensic investigators could eventually connect to her. She grabbed the edge of the dressing table to steady herself. Then another realization hit her even harder. She had never sent anyone to Samuel's hospital room. If she hadn't, then who had? Someone else was moving against the same witnesses. Someone who knew enough to eliminate loose ends. And that meant the conspiracy surrounding Michael Carter's death was larger than she had ever imagined. Victoria looked at her own reflection. For the first time in years, the woman staring back at her didn't look like the one in control. She looked like the next target. The intensive care unit was unnaturally quiet. The rhythmic beeping of heart monitors echoed through the corridor. Ethan stood outside Samuel Brooks' room, staring through the glass. The old groundskeeper lay unconscious, surrounded by machines. For 20 years, Samuel had carried a secret powerful enough to terrify people who controlled billions of dollars. And now, someone had tried to make sure he never woke up. Detective Laura Bennett folded her arms. "We've doubled security." Ethan nodded. "No one goes into that room without my knowledge." The detective looked at him carefully. "You seem convinced this isn't about stolen diamonds." It isn't. What makes you so sure? Ethan looked through the glass again. Nobody risks committing murder over jewelry that's already been recovered. The detective didn't answer. She had been thinking exactly the same thing. Back at Harrison Manor, Emily sat quietly in the security office. Nearly every employee had gone home after giving statements. Only she remained. The chief of security entered carrying a folder. Emily slowly stood. "Am I going home?" The man looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I'm sorry." He placed the folder on the desk. "The board has made a decision." Emily's heart sank. "What decision?" He hesitated. "Effective immediately. Your employment with Harrison Manor has been terminated." The words crushed her. Grace gasped. "What?" The chief lowered his eyes. "Pending the outcome of the criminal investigation, Miss Carter is no longer permitted on Harrison property." Emily couldn't breathe. "I've worked here for 3 years. I know. I've never stolen anything. I know." Tears streamed down her face. "Then why?" The chief answered quietly. "The board believes public confidence in the Harrison Foundation would suffer if—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Emily laughed bitterly through her tears. "So, I'm guilty before anyone proves I did anything." Nobody answered. Silence was answer enough. Grace stepped forward. "This is wrong." One board member looked away. Another adjusted his tie. Not one person defended Emily. Not one. Victoria stood near the doorway, hiding her satisfaction behind a mask of sympathy. She slowly approached Emily. "I'm truly sorry it ended this way." Emily looked directly into her eyes. For several long seconds, neither woman spoke. Then Emily quietly said, "I don't know how." Victoria smiled softly. "What?" "I don't know how you did it." Victoria's expression didn't change. "But someday," Emily continued, "the truth is going to catch up with whoever destroyed my life." For the briefest moment, Victoria's smile faltered. Only for a second. Then it returned. "I hope you find peace." Emily answered with tears in her eyes. "I don't want peace." The room became silent. "I want justice." Victoria turned and walked away. But those 3 words echoed behind her like footsteps. Outside the mansion, Emily stepped through the front gates carrying a single cardboard box. Inside were everything she owned. 2 uniforms, 3 books, a framed photograph of her parents, and the small wooden music box she had repaired. The security gates slowly closed behind her. The sound echoed through the empty driveway. Emily stood there alone. The same mansion that had once felt like hope now looked like a prison she had barely escaped. She didn't know where she would sleep. She didn't know how she would pay rent. She had lost her job, her reputation, her future. A cold wind swept across the estate. Emily clutched the box tighter. Then she began walking down the long road leading away from Harrison Manor. Not once did she look back. Inside the mansion, Richard remained alone in Alina's library. The journal rested open on the desk. His eyes stopped on one sentence. Michael refused to change the numbers. Richard whispered to himself, "If that's true, who changed them?" His phone rang. It was the Foundation's external auditing firm. Richard answered. "This is Harrison." The voice on the other end sounded shaken. "Mr. Harrison, we've started reviewing archived financial records as you requested. And there appears to be a serious problem." Richard stood. What kind of problem? We've discovered that several disaster relief accounts dating back more than 20 years. The auditor paused. Were deliberately altered. Richard's face turned pale. How much money are we talking about? Another pause. Then, we can't give an exact figure yet. But based on what we've found so far, it's well over $100 million. Richard nearly dropped the phone. 100 million. Not a bookkeeping error. Not a misunderstanding. A massive fraud. One that began the same year Michael Carter died. Across town, the black SUV parked beneath an abandoned warehouse. The masked driver stepped out carrying a worn leather satchel. The same satchel Samuel had tried to hand Ethan. Inside the warehouse, a lone figure waited in the shadows. You have it. The driver handed over the satchel. The mysterious figure opened it. Inside were old accounting ledgers, canceled checks, photographs, and one sealed envelope marked in Billionaire Harrison's handwriting. To Ethan, only if I am no longer alive. The figure stared at the envelope for several seconds, then smiled. So, Billionaire knew. Without opening the envelope, the figure locked the satchel inside a steel safe. No, the voice whispered. Not yet. Ethan isn't ready. The camera slowly revealed only one detail about the stranger. On the right hand was a silver signet ring engraved with the Harrison family crest. Someone from the Harrison bloodline had hidden the truth for 20 years, or protected it. The audience couldn't yet know which. At the hospital, a heart monitor suddenly began beeping faster. Detective Bennett turned toward Samuel's room. Nurse. Doctors rushed inside. Ethan followed as far as the doorway. Samuel's eyes slowly opened. He looked terrified. His lips trembled. Ethan. Ethan stepped closer. I'm here. Samuel struggled to speak. They. His breathing became labored. It weren't. Tears rolled down